3 years ago, I set out to construct the most powerful nootropic stack for focus, motivation, and sheer cognitive horsepower. I logged hundreds of hours, sampled endless amounts of cognitive performance chemicals, and ran beta tests with soldiers from the United States Army. And after massive experimentation and ruthless trial and error, my work had finally paid off. I found what I was looking for.
If you have tried the stacks that are on the market, Alpha Brain, True Brain, CILTEP, OptiMind, MindLab Pro, others, you probably like them. Because a lot of those, most of the stacks are good stacks. I mean, I've gotten a result from all those stacks. I didn't necessarily get the right result from all those stacks. Alpha Brain is probably the best for me. True Brain was pretty interesting. But I built a stack, that was based on a stack that I was using to build a company from scratch to a couple $100,000 in annual revenue in a short period of time with annual contracts with customers like Crayola, the crayon company, and some other big impressive clients, which was totally crazy because I was functioning totally great and a lot of work to do, and I had to do a lot of, I had to be everything. I mean, folks know that entrepreneurs are both you're the finance person, you're the marketer, you're the business development person, you're the technician, you're the janitor, when you're running a business and you're a solo entrepreneur. So to keep my brain functioning, I built a stack to keep my brain functioning peakly throughout that process, and that was Cortex. I then, went through a bunch of beta testing with a bunch of people, particularly soldiers from the United States Army, and then tried a whole lot of other things, sort of adding into the stack, and finished it off as what ended up being the Cortex stack. Snag a bottle of the Cortex stack at livecortex.com. You will not regret getting Cortex if you want to work for long periods of time and have the motivation to do so and have good brain performance while doing it. Okay, so nootropics and chronic fatigue syndrome have an interesting interplay. Chronic fatigue syndrome, for folks that don't know what it is essentially this is what happens. Somebody gets the Epstein-Barr virus or another major kind of virus. They don't recover from it. They get mono or they get viral illness. They feel sick and run down and fatigued for a while, and they don't recover from it. That acute phase, like when you get sick and you have the flu, you're like it's a week or two or whatever, and you just feel terrible and you can't do much. Well, with chronic fatigue, you get some sort of virus, mostly the Epstein-Barr virus. I guess there's other viruses that you might get, and then that acute phase of you being totally useless and bedridden doesn't go away for 4 or 5 months, 6 months. And then in the ensuing 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 10 years, maybe even the rest of your life for some people, you have relapses of the acute phases where you can't do anything, you can't function, you can't think, you got to lay in bed, you're useless. It affects your life, it affects your job performance, it'll affect your job, it'll affect your financial status, it'll affect your relationships. It's terrible. It's like a debilitating disease, period. Chronic fatigue syndrome is debilitating. There's no question about it. Well, I think I've been studying a lot of functional medicine and listening to a lot of functional medicine doctors. I think that for a lot of folks, there are reasons for chronic fatigue that ensues. A lot of it has to do with the Epstein-Barr virus. Some of it has to do with the Epstein-Barr virus ending up in your thyroid gland and wreaking havoc in your thyroid gland, messing with your metabolic rate and energy, and your ability to perform physically and cognitively. I mean, that's why folks have cognitive issues on it. It's one of the reasons. A lot of folks will benefit from, you might have subclinical hypothyroidism, basically, where, you get thyroid tests, it's in the range for, doctors, and they go, you're fine, but really, you really do have a problem. And at that point, you might want to look at some iodine and some selenium supplementation to help the thyroid gland function properly. That's been very helpful for me. I have chronic fatigue syndrome. I got hit with Epstein-Barr in 2015. Same thing, I was sick for 5-6 months, and then I got better mostly, took a lot of antiviral herbs, but then it sort of, in continuing nature, every few months thereafter just relapsed, and it hit me hard, and it took me off my feet. I couldn't think or do anything, and it was terrible. And it sort of keeps happening. And now I have it more under control, sort of working my way up back to exercise. One of the things you can't do is exercise because it'll just make everything worse for weeks. Anyway, I have taken nootropics through the time of having chronic fatigue syndrome. And for those of you who have it, I think they play an important role in some instances, allowing the brain to function well when you need the brain to function well. to get a particular thing done, right? Because it's hard. It takes over your life if you're very sick for a while. You can't do things. You can't make money. And that becomes a problem if you're out there living on your own. How are you going to pay your rent? How are you going to do things? And so I think it's important to know how to use nootropics in that regard to do what you need to get done in some instances, and then make sure you're sleeping a lot more if you can to make up for that extra output. But one thing I would consider, and by the way, I mean strictly what I've used for chronic fatigue syndrome would be Cortex for brain energy and alertness and good mental functioning, and modafinil. Those two have probably been the best. And acetyl-L-carnitine helps also because it helps the brain produce energy, helps mitochondria function. One of the things that goes wrong is mitochondrial function. I'm gonna make sure this thing is still on. Yeah, we're still good. Okay. So Alcar, works relatively well. But I would say use it intermittently, nootropics, when you have chronic fatigue syndrome. And just understand that I think for a lot of folks, I think partially this is the issue for me because I'm so high strung as an entrepreneur. I've been at it for too long without a break. For a lot of folks, there's probably some degree of like adrenal burnout happening, or adrenal gland just don't function well. Like there gets a point where you work yourself too much, your body cannot handle the work you're putting on it. And these systems that prevent you from overloading and that continue to sort of give you energy to function well can burn out. I mean, just like anything else. You run 10 miles, you're going to burn out if you're not eating enough glucose, like starches or whatever to give you glucose in your blood. I mean, you're just going to, if you're working on fat, I mean, eventually you're just going to hit a brick wall, and that happens to people energy-wise. And so I would just be careful, because I think a lot of what constitutes chronic fatigue syndrome in a lot of people, not all people, but a lot of people, is it's just a burnt out nervous system, burnt out adrenal glands. So, if you crank up the nervous system with modafinil or something, or Cortex, then, I just think you should be mindful that you might put yourself in a place where you're overdoing it, and then you crash for a couple of days and you just feel terrible for a couple of days. So be very, very mindful of that. Try to sleep as much as you can if you're going to do that. But overall, I would say, yes, I have taken nootropics while having chronic fatigue syndrome. It has helped me in certain situations for sure. In other situations, it might not have been worth it, but I would say use them judiciously in this particular case, and just keep in mind that if you're going to and you feel pretty normal again because you got your brain working better for the time being, make sure you rest thereafter so that you can recover. And even if you do feel great, try not to overdo it, because you want to burn out further like adrenal glands or other functioning that isn't up to par yet because you haven't rested enough and you haven't recovered it. You haven't got your thyroid gland functioning correctly. You haven't gotten your energy functioning correctly, mitochondria function correctly, these sorts of things. Overall, it is a terribly debilitating disease, but I am of the belief that one can overcome it. But you have to know how. And the medical community is not very good at that. Functional medicine doctors seem to be pretty good at that. That would be the way to go for something like that, because you're dealing with a bunch of systems that are probably functionally malfunctioning, and you've got to correct each one of those systems. Thyroid gland, stress, the gut, these sorts of things before you can actually start to sleep, before you can start to heal. Thanks for watching.